This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price you can get Truefire All Access for.
I saw Rod Wave's guitarist Joey Z. Anyway, he'd been on a podcast with Rob Chapman. I think he might be a Chapman artist, I think. But anyway, he tours with these. I think he's toured with Aloe Black as well. But it was something quite interesting that popped out, because there was this video, like, they were talking about how basically if you're a touring guitarist at this point, you're hired like as a session guy by whoever the musical director is or whatever, not the artists themselves. And they were talking about essentially like the pressure that there is, like it's maybe an unsaid thing, and you're given the option that you could use a backline amp if you wanted to potentially, but you're kind of strongly encouraged, and I think this is the way things are going, to be using a modeler of some form. And I think this is exactly what some modelers have been totally made for, and you know, like Fractal, Line 6, Helix and that sort of stuff. Definitely Kemper were made with it all along in mind that, you know, a touring pro would use these things on a gig. And I think there's a few things that came out from this which were interesting to me. But, of course, the thing that worries me, like a little bit, and maybe other people, is that, you know, people are having the choice to use a real amp sort of removed from them. And my main concern with this is really that once it, and it probably is already way past the point, once it is the norm that you're expected to be touring with a modeler, that just using an amp in general is just not going to come back. The other thing that does concern me, that I don't know if people are maybe being slow to realise this, is that once you're using a modeler on a stage, to me, it does. If you're already using track as well, it doesn't seem to me like a huge stretch to just put that guitar on the backing track. Unless it's a particularly sort of guitar-focused gig, that for me is like a little bit of a worry. Like, how much do you need that guitarist on the stage if there isn't like an amp in the room type sound anyway? Is it that important? So, the real thing for me that kind of jumped out that was interesting, though, that they were talking about, I think Joey said that his most hated amp is a Fender Twin. And it's kind of interesting to me, like, if you imagine, like, what sort of player you are and what your sort of ideal amp might be, that if you were a touring guitarist using backline amps, you might be bitterly disappointed by the choice of what's available. So I decided that I'd go and check out an Australian backline sort of company and see what amps are available. I was kind of surprised.
So here, I caught this Gear Space, it used to be Gear Sluts, right? Folks here that were asking in 2011 about touring with rented backline, specific models which could be rented in Spain, Portugal, Sweden, UK, Australia. So this is kind of, I guess, typical stuff. And this guy here said, jump on this website. So I thought, let's go on this website and see what brands are actually available. So in terms of guitar amplifiers, I guess it's going to see what we got under Boss. Well, not a lot of pedals, to be fair. Okay, we've got tuners and delays. Quite a lot of stuff for drummers. You drummers are doing all right, aren't you? Some guitars, Ernie Ball. This one, obviously Fender. And the amps that they've got here. So a twin Silverface combo. So an old vintage twin. Hot Rod Deluxe. Hot Rod DeVille. So these two, I think, have become somewhat staples of the sort of backline world. You hear people talk about these quite a lot. I don't know exactly why. I think they're considerably cheaper than a Deluxe Reverb. That might be it. Then 59 Bassman Limited 4x10 combo. That wouldn't be bad to turn up on your gig, would it? 65 Deluxe Reverb. So I think this is the one that used to be a bit of a standard. I'm not sure it is anymore. Hot Rod DeVille, Twin Reverb. So Hot Rod DeVille or a Twin Reverb seem to be the things that people end up on more often than the Deluxe Reverb. Pro Junior. I don't know why that's there. 65 Vibrolux Reverb 2x10. That's going to be a little bit of a rarer one, I'd imagine. 65 Super Reverb. This one I've heard people mention as well. Blues Junior 3, Blues DeVille. Again, sort of that DeVille sort of situation. Jules Showman guitar head. That's a twin in head form. Twin Red Knob, Hot Rod DeVille, Hot Rod Deluxe. So again, just mostly Deluxes and Blues Deluxe. Deluxes and DeVilles. Princeton Reverb here. Okay. Then Marshall-wise, got JCM 800, JCM 2000, they got a 50 watt and 100 watt. That was good enough. I think Nuno Betancourt uses those. And Gary Moore, right? Anyway, if it's good enough for them. JMP 2203, JCM 800, 2203. And I think this one here, isn't that the one that Polyphia were using the return of? TSL 100 watt, 900. A Bluesbreaker guitar combo. So that one, I've actually owned that amp very briefly. It's heavy, but it is a cool amp. That's like a JTM 45 essentially in a combo. And then JCM 900. There's less amp choices here than you'd think. This is a matchless DC30. Mezza, the only things that they've got really. Dual rectifiers, a Mark V combo, and a Lone Star Special. Now, that's going to start to fall off, you'd imagine, because that's been discontinued for years at this point. Triple rectifier and dual rectifier. Like, it's not a ton of choice. High watt. I see pros using high watts. I wonder if these are amps that are all over the place more so. What else have we got? Mark Bass, matchless. I don't imagine that you'd have a matchless DC30 in many backline companies. Yeah, it's not a ton of choices, right? Like a lot of choices for drummers. Schlagwork, pay extra for that. Vox, and maybe we've probably got an AC15, AC30, right? You think if you were into heavier sorts of styles of music, what are you going to play? A twin, an AC30, or a triple rectifier, a dual rectifier? It's not a ton of choices in terms of backline. And again, if you're, someone who's using a 2-rock or something like that, like I don't know. It feels like you should probably get used to using, if you're insisting as being a touring guitarist who's going to use like a real amp on stage, you better get friendly with these brands that are out there. Like, if it's not a Vox, a Marshall or Fender, you might be out of luck.
Then the other thing that Joey kind of said was that he's recently found that plugging his Line 6 Helix into the return of, I think it was a Hot Rod DeVille. He had some really interesting experiences doing that. The quality of backline amps, or like not so much the quality, but the like how serviced they are as well, is definitely been something that I've heard many pros talk about. Like, you really don't know what you're going to get until you get there and you're playing with the amp. And then Rob was also talking about carrying around spare valves or tubes as a young man touring. I've never had an issue with an amp actually breaking on a gig. That's never happened to me. I've also never toured an amp, so maybe that's why, because my amps are quite nicely, like, they'll get a gig a week, maybe 2 gigs in some weeks, but they're not terribly, like, overworked, if you know what I mean. But there definitely are loads of horror stories that you hear. But that was an interesting thing to me. So say you're someone who normally uses, like, I don't know, like the Victory amps, if you imagine, like the Kraken or whatever, those kind of heavier styles of amps, or like a PV5150 style amp, or an EVH 5150, or a Rev of some form, or someone who's into like a more boutique sort of 2-rock sort of thing. Basically, it looked to me like the backline amp thing is pretty narrow in terms of what choices you actually still have around an amp. So Fender, Marshall and Vox, you've probably got a fair amount of choice amongst that. Certainly you'll be able to find a twin probably all over the world. A JCM 800 or some sort of Marshall JCM 2000 you'd probably be able to find. And a Vox AC30 you'd probably be able to find. Outside of that, I think if you're not gigging those amps and you're not working with a company directly who can supply you amps, then it looks like you're kind of out of luck, right? And so maybe this is another reason that people are kind of going, well, you know, I don't want to play amp bingo if I'm on a tour. Equally, hiring backline amps versus if someone can just go out with a Quad Cortex or a Kemper player or whatever and just carry it all in their bag, then that is going to be potentially quite a lot cheaper for the tour manager. And so at that stage, it's not even about your playing or whatever. It's like, if I hire this guy, when I look down the list of expenses, there's a Hot Rod DeVille, you know, for 20 days or something on this one, versus this one, I don't have to hire anything for this guy. I think that's quite an interesting thought as well. Yeah, I don't know. Something that I kind of hadn't really heard, and my first reaction if someone says, you know, they hate a Fender Twin is like, why? But at the same time, like, if it's just not the sort of amp that works for your playing, then what use is it if you show up to a gig with a Fender Twin if you're trying to play, I don't know, heavier styles of music? It's not terribly useful. And likewise, like a Vox AC30, you know, is that terribly useful? Not really either. So to some extent, you'd imagine that actually backline companies at this point might be just as well offering like FRFR type solutions and you plug your own modeler into. Or the band just has, I don't know how that part works. Do you just cart around an FR12 or something? Or because it's all in ears anyway, there even an FRFR involved on most pro stages? I guess probably the idea with it in general will be that you could keep that stage as clear as possible. Yeah, interesting to me. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. Like, obviously I use a modeler all the time, but I do like the idea that you could rock up with an amp, and especially if you're like a pro touring, that you'd be able to sort of make your pick of the tools that you need to get your job done. Seems like that's sort of going away a little bit, and that's kind of a shame, I think.